And Sullivan will all tell you, well, the Russians are weak. The Russian economy is fragile. The Russian armed forces are poor. Their generals are terrible. And they can't possibly win. All we have to do is to keep up the pressure and they will collapse. Well, that's been a hell of a strategy. And it's killed large numbers of people and created millions of refugees and destroyed the country, but it hasn't hurt Russia. And Russia today is stronger than it has been in 30 or 40 years. You have a Russian military establishment that is now more potent and more capable than the Russian military was in the mid-1980s.
Why? Wars typically, don't they degrade a military force?
Well, the Russians have been very, very careful and deliberate, very cautious about the expenditure of life.
What do you think the casualty numbers are in Russia?
That's a hard one to estimate. I think probably 40 to 50,000 killed, maybe another 40 to 50,000 wounded.
Wait, total?
Yes.
As compared to the Ukrainian?
400,000 dead. Yeah. And the manpower is leaving Ukraine as quickly as it could get out because people don't want to be thrown into the meat grinder. You can't defeat what the Russians have built. They were the first back in the 1970s to understand the criticality of linking intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance in space, as well as on land and at sea, with strike weapons. What's a strike weapon? Rockets, missiles, guided artillery for precision. They've done that extremely well. So that's one of the reasons they have thousands of guns, hundreds of rocket launchers, hundreds of ballistic missile launchers, cruise missiles, and so forth. And these are then linked to that ISR. So the response time is almost instantaneous. A Ukrainian formation is located at this spot next to this building on the outskirts of, say, Kharkov. They can have missiles on the way to those targets or rockets or drones within the space of perhaps 5, 6, 7 minutes. So this is a very well-structured, well-organized machine. And the machine is grinding up everything in front of it. And it's not going to be defeated. A lot of the equipment we send over there is, quite frankly, obsolete. It's very old. It's not new. We've given them a few new items, but not much. And remember what I said about missiles. We sent them some Patriot missiles. And I think at this point in this newest round of money, $750 million, something like that, we're sending 33 missiles, Patriot missiles. These are missiles that are used to shoot down aircraft or cruise missiles, incoming opposing forces. Every time you're in air defense, people will tell you if there's a target out there, you shoot 2 missiles at it as a minimum to make sure you get the target. Well, you run out of our missiles in the space of a few days. 33 missiles will be gone in 2 or 3 days. You can't possibly defeat the thousands of projectiles that are being hurled in your direction. And the radars, of course, emit, and so your radars light up and become targets. This is a no-win situation because the Russians, though they were not prepared in February 2022 for this kind of war, they are now. And they're continuing to prepare, which includes continuous mobilization. They're up to 750,000 troops in and around Ukraine. Most of them are on the outskirts, Belarus, Western Russia, down in southern Ukraine. That number is going to rise over the next year, I would expect, to 1.2 million. And people are reservists being called out of universities. People are being through the military now, working in universities to become engineers, architects, mathematicians, whatever. They're being pulled out, put in a uniform, and readied. Because, again, our intransigence, our demonstrated hatred and hostility for Moscow and for Russia has convinced the Russian people, as well as the leadership in Moscow, that they are going to have to fight us and anyone who is allied with us. So they're preparing for that eventuality. That's why it's so important that we have to wake up, understand what we've done has backfired. Whatever we set out to achieve has failed. What we need to do now is stop this and come to a settlement that we may not like, but it needs to happen, and soon, before this thing is out of control. Eventually, you keep this up within the next 6, 8 months, you'll see hundreds of thousands of Russian troops on the Polish border. That is not what we set out to achieve.
No, it's a terrifying disaster. And what cost do you think to the United States?
The latest estimates since 2001, spending, including the spending in Ukraine, all the military spending designed to support these interventions, conflicts, wars, whatever you want to call them, about $14 trillion. Now, that $14 trillion is largely debt financed. So then you have to move from the 14 trillion to where we stand now in national sovereign debt, which of course I know the economic luminaries think is meaningless. But you have 130 million workers, and you look at those figures and suddenly you realize that every adult male or woman in the United States who works for a living has a debt hanging over them of roughly $240,000 in order to deal with what the 14 trillion have added to the national sovereign debt. And this is part of the issue that people are walking away from this war for good reasons. Look, the average American earns about $31,000 a year. That's it. The average American pays about $16,600 a year. Now, the people in Congress, this doesn't affect them, or in the Hill or inside the Beltway. We're talking about the real Americans who live out there, who are scratching out a living. Keep in mind that a person who works all his life and then tries to draw on Social Security can expect a monthly payment of probably $1,400 if they're lucky. $1,400. We hand every alleged asylum seeker, illegal migrant pouring in through the border in Texas or wherever else, we hand them when they get there $2,200. And we put them on that $2,200 diet from there on out per month. Yet somebody who works all his life, retires and draws Social Security gets $1,400. The Afghans who were hanging on to the planes in Kabul trying to come to the United States, when they arrived, they received $2,200 a month. Now, if you can make sense out of this, please try, because I don't think most Americans can make sense out of this at all. And that's one of the reasons people have said, not because they know anything about Ukraine. Most Americans don't. If they knew anything about the history of Eastern Europe, they would all say, get out. Because the wars and the blood and the hatred that have been characterized to that part of the world for hundreds of years is something we can't sort out. We can't fix it. We shouldn't try to arbitrate it. We don't know anything about it. We shouldn't be in this, is the bottom line. I think Americans have figured that out. But now they're beginning to look at the numbers and the figures, and they say, what happened to consent by the governed? Instead, we have contempt for the governed. Whatever the governed want, they don't get. Who gets it? Well, the donors get what they want. You know, somebody was joking the other day and said, you know, Doug, if the donors were cannibals, they'd feed the American people to them. That's the attitude in Washington, D.C. What's the donor want? Give me more money. It's a catastrophe. It's the destruction of our whole republic. I don't think people realize how far gone things are. A lot of Americans sense it. And I think we're on the path to some sort of national come to Jesus moment where we're tired of being the contemptibles. We want to have a say in what our government does, and we really don't have it. So there are people that are interested in getting control of it. Oligarchs. They call them oligarchs in Eastern Europe. I'm starting to think that we should talk about oligarchs in the West.
Well, of course. Because
they're also invested in this. They have an interest in it. So that's part of it. Then, of course, you have the advantages of people on the Hill. You have somebody like McConnell who says, we're so fortunate that we're doing so much damage to the Russians. This will set them back for 10 years. They've lost all this equipment. The Ukrainians have done a great job. Well, of course, all that's a lie. That's a blatant falsehood. And then he follows up by saying, and we're offloading equipment so that we can replenish with newer equipment. Well, unfortunately, the new equipment we're going to buy looks an awful lot like the old equipment. So you're not necessarily getting new top-of-the-line material. You're just getting new versions of what you've already got, which, of course, is what Congress wants. Unfortunately, that doesn't prepare you for a future war because your probable opponents are investing in very different capabilities from the ones that you have. And remember, again, all the things that we once monopolized, all the precision, all of that's lost now. Everybody has it. There's nothing that we can do that they cannot also do in Moscow, in Beijing, and probably in many other countries that we don't even know about yet. But of course, it all means money. You know, where does the money go? Does it go into the Defense Department? Sure. But then it's transferred over into industry. And industry then contributes money to PACs. And the PAC money goes where? Back to the Hill. So it's a wonderful sort of recycling machine.